Oh, yes, I can. Okay. Cool. Great. Let's get started then. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, this class is on biochemistry, which is, oh no, what have I done? Which is the study of biology and chemistry kind of mixed. So if you think of biology and what you know, we obviously have plants and animals and everything, but this kind of studies the deep down itty bitty parts. So molecules and cells is probably going to be like the furthest we go in terms of biology. Um, Chemistry wise, chemistry is kind of a math heavy subject, but in this case, we're kind of going if you could mute yourself, if you're not trying to ask a question, that would be really, really great. But yeah, so for chemistry, we're probably going to go into more of the theoretical ideas, and how chemistry works with the human body is going to be like the main focus. Okay, so let's get started. Um, if you saw on the, I guess, advertisement video, we're going to cover about 7 sections. So I think this class is going to be about 7 to 8 weeks long. The first of those topics is the major molecules, which is proteins, lipids, carbs, and nucleic acids. Before we go into this, I do want to give you a brief overview of, I guess, some chemistry concepts that will be really useful for this course. So we're going to start with that, and then we'll go into the major molecules themselves. Okay. Before we start, does anybody have any questions like logistics, technicalities, anything like that? Go ahead and put it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I'll give 5 seconds or so. Nope? Okay, then let's keep going. So, that works. So the building blocks of life, we're gonna start off with chemistry. Can anybody tell me what they think I'm referring to when I say the building blocks of life? You can unmute yourself and put it in the chat. Oh, sorry, question. Is this class talking about AP Chem or regular Chem? So I took AP Chemistry, but I don't really plan on going into as much detail as we did in AP Chemistry. I can't tell you about regular chemistry, but it's just going to have like a basic overview. So what you learn in this class will help you understand some units if you're going into an AP Chem class. As for regular chemistry, it might be a little bit too detailed, but it still will be useful. It'll be more useful for biology than anything though. DNA, cells, close. Try and think of it from a more chemical standpoint. So maybe less biology, more chemistry. Molecules, okay? Anyone else? Atoms. Okay. Sanaya, did I say that right? Yeah, you got it. I'm talking about atoms, and then we'll keep going and we'll get elements, and then yes, molecules, Haley. Sania. Okay, got it. Thank you. Did I say it right this time? Sania? Okay, cool. So the building blocks of life, atoms. So here we have the structure of an atom. I'm sure you've all seen a diagram similar to this before. We see you have the electrons on the outside. They're revolving around the nucleus of the atom, which is composed of protons and neutrons. So protons, as you can see the diagram, are positively charged. Neutrons are neutral. It's kind of, you can assume that from the name. And electrons are negatively charged. So this diagram, you'll definitely see it a lot in a chemistry class, but it just gives you an idea of how small and yet how detailed chemicals and molecules and elements actually are. So let's keep going. Now we have the periodic table of elements, which I am very, very sure that everybody has seen before. I just want to make sure that you're all clear on how to read a periodic table, what all of the symbols mean. I'm not expecting you to memorize it or anything, but just know what all the different numbers and things are for. So if we look at boron, for example, you have a 5 at the top, then it says B, then it has the actual name boron, and then you have a 10.81 at the bottom. So what do all these numbers mean? I'm pretty sure the B stands for boron. You guys can get that. But what about the 5 and the 10.81? Well, let's see. So this example uses carbon. At the very top, we have the atomic number. Then the C is the element symbol, and carbon is the element name, and then 12.01 is the atomic mass. So the atomic mass is the sum of the protons and the neutrons. It's how much the atom is supposed to weigh. So the reason it's only protons and neutrons is because electrons weigh such a small amount. Compared to protons and neutrons, they're actually very, very small. And so that's why they don't really factor in to the atomic mass. So the atomic number gives the number of protons or neutrons in the element. So in this case for carbon, from this information, you would know that there are 6 protons in the carbon atom. Something I want to talk about really quickly is the idea of isotopes. We'll definitely go into that in more detail later, but since we have this up and you guys can see it, we'll just tackle that really quickly now. So isotopes occur when you have an extra neutron or like more neutrons or fewer neutrons. Basically, you vary the number of neutrons in an atom. So I think if I can go back a slide, let's see. Yeah, okay. So you can see the protons and neutrons in the nucleus. So what happens with an isotope is you either have an extra neutron or one less of a neutron or any number really. And what happens then is it changes the mass. So remember we talked about how the 12.01 is the atomic mass. It comes from the weight of the protons and the neutrons. So I'm sure you guys might have heard of like carbon-14. So carbon-12 is the stable kind of usual version of carbon. Carbon-14 occurs when you have an extra, when you have more neutrons than obviously carbon-12. So it just changes the mass. And a change in mass means that the carbon atom would be radioactive. So carbon-14 is radioactive and it's going to decay back to carbon-12. We'll go into that in more detail, but that might just, that'd be a good starting point. So now we're into the molecules that we're talking about, the most important molecules for life. So we have the most important elements for life. That's carbon, hydrogen. Oh, I misspelled that horribly. Okay, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and then calcium and phosphorus. So the first 4, the way that I was taught to remember them is the abbreviation CHON. So C for carbon, H for hydrogen, O for oxygen. Oh my gosh, this type is really bothering me. And N for nitrogen. These 4 will make up a really large amount of all of your cells. And then calcium and phosphorus, they're not as common or as abundant as the first 4, but they add together to compose 99% of a living cell. So just those 6 elements basically makes up your entire body. So something else that's really important in terms of biochemistry, so biology, like the small parts of biology, are hydrocarbons and other carbon chains. So hydrocarbons are basically molecules made up of carbon and hydrogen atoms. You can tell by the name. And if you look in this diagram, I wonder if I can, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Okay, so right here, you can see that there is 3 lines versus here you have 1 line. So can anybody tell me, do you know what the difference between the 3 lines versus 1 line is? You can unmute yourself or use the chat, anything. Okay, yeah. So we've got alkene, it's a different type of bond, right? And triple bond stronger. So yeah, this is a triple bond, a single bond. And triple bonds are stronger. I mean, it's fairly intuitive, but the more bonds you have, the stronger the connection. So hydrocarbons, you can have any number of bonds. That doesn't really matter. That kind of delves more into the chemistry part, but we're not going to cover that. So the number of bonds shows strength of the chain, but more than that, it just shows that carbon and hydrogen can bond together and they can bond to each other. So hydrocarbons, generally you'll draw them in this format. You'll have the C's in the middle. Whoever is unmuted, did you have a question or? Nope. Okay. Okay. So yeah, hydrocarbons and carbon chains are very common in biology, and you'll definitely see this a lot in the coming units. All right, so macromolecules. These are generally the most important molecules in your body. You can say that knowing these macromolecules will definitely prepare you to learn a lot of other concepts. But more than that, we use them a lot in day-to-day life, as you'll see when we go into them. So yeah, let's get started. All right, so our first macromolecule is carbs or carbohydrates. Now, we can break carbohydrates down into their parts. So for each macromolecule, you can consider it to be broken down into monomers and polymers. So I don't think I use those words anywhere on this slideshow. So I want to make sure that you guys remember that because it does appear on the homework. So monomers are the smallest, I guess, not the smallest, but the smaller version that builds into the actual macromolecule. And then you have the polymers, and polymers, you can consider them to be multiple monomers combined together. Okay, so for carbohydrates, it is split into monosaccharides, which join together to form disaccharides, which join together to form polysaccharides. So you can see in this image that we have carbon rings right here, and one carbon ring is a monosaccharide. If you join them together, you get a disaccharide, and then multiple of them together is a polysaccharide. So let's keep going. The monomers and polymers of carbohydrates. So you have monosaccharides. Some examples are glucose, fructose, and galactose. You'll definitely see the first two a lot, the last one not so much. Disaccharides, which would be two of the monosaccharides put together. You have sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And then for polysaccharides, one thing I do want to point out is that monosaccharides and disaccharides listed are sugars, and then the polysaccharides listed here are non-sugars. So polysaccharides are very important to biology in that for plants, polysaccharides kind of form the storage as well as the structural units of a plant. So if you picture like, let's say a vine or something, vines have a distinct shape. They have a structure to them, and the energy stored, I'm sorry, yes, I will talk slower. Okay, so for a plant, the structure of a plant, if you picture a vine, it's got a very set structure. It's flimsy, but it's got a structure, right? You can picture it. And that the ability to hold itself upright comes from cellulose. Starch, which is a storage, it stores the energy for a plant. In animals, we have glycogen and chitin. So glycogen is the storage polysaccharide in an animal, and chitin is the structural polysaccharide in an animal. So then we have oligosaccharides, which are longer chains of sugar monosaccharides. So if we look at the monosaccharides we have glucose, fructose, and galactose. So if you add two of those together, you would get a disaccharide, and if you were to add multiple of those together, you would get an oligosaccharide. Okay? Do you have any questions on this slide? No? Okay, then let's keep going. So what types of foods do you think would fall within the carbohydrate category? Pasta, rice, noodles, breads. Yeah, so when you think of carbs, eating carbs, that's probably like one of the most common words. You definitely would think of things like pasta, rice, noodles, and breads. So you all are very much correct. We have pasta, rice, noodles, bread, grains. Yeah, everything you would think of when you think of carbs. Okay, so now on to lipids. Um, Carbs was pretty intuitive. Lipids. Do you guys have any idea what lipids compose in terms of like what you eat and such? Not exact examples of foods, but like there's one word that you can use to describe a lipid. If anybody gets it, then that would be like on the nose. Yeah, fats. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, kind of true to its name, lipids can be broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. So the monomers of lipids would be fatty acids and glycerol. So if you look at the images that we have here, what do these images remind you of? Yeah, triglycerides will, they'll show up on the next slide. So yeah. But what do these images remind you of? We saw an image similar to this on a previous slide. Yes, bonds. But what kind of chains are these? If you guys don't remember, that's cool. I will tell you in a second if anybody. Polymers, carbon. Carbon, you're very close. Hydrocarbon, exactly, that's on it. Yes, these are hydrocarbon chains. So yeah, you can already see we're seeing hydrocarbon chains. Okay, so there are three main types of lipids. We have triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols. So each type of lipid has a distinct function, I guess, in the body. So triglycerides are generally found in fried or fatty foods. You can consume triglycerides just by eating, and they compose 95% of lipids obtained from diet. So if you were to eat, about 95% of the fat that you eat would be in the form of a triglyceride. So triglycerides have this structure where you take one glycerol monomer, you attach it to a free fatty acid monomer, or I guess three in this case, and you form the triglyceride polymer. Then we have phospholipids. Phospholipids are very important to cellular functions because if you've taken biology, then you know the structure of a cell, and what goes around the cell would be the cell membrane. Cell membranes are made up entirely of phospholipids, a few proteins, but they're composed of phospholipids. Phospholipids are named because they contain a phosphate group, which is a chemical functional group that we might discuss later. And phospholipids make up cellular membranes. Like I said earlier, that's their main function. Oh, no. Oh, cool. Okay. So phospholipids have, if I don't know if you guys can see very well, but it's got the names right here. They have hydrophobic tails and hydrophilic heads. Does anybody know the difference between hydrophobic and hydrophilic? Water resistant, fears water. Non-water resistant, attracts water. Yeah, I actually really like, oh my God, I'm not going to pronounce your name right. Nitia's comment, phobic, fear of water, philic, likes water. Yeah, that's the way I memorized it as well. So if you have if you have a hydrophobic part, then that means it doesn't really like water. You can think of like oil in water. And hydrophilic, it likes water. You can think of like sugar in water, it kind of dissolves. So yeah, the hydrophobic tails and the hydrophilic head make phospholipids really ideal and very good at making up cellular membranes and membranous structures in the body. So then our last category would be sterols, for example, cholesterol. So a sterol is a waxy solid produced by plants, animals, fungi, and some bacteria. And if you can see these carbon rings, these like hexagonal structures are called carbon rings. And what happens is they all join and they form waxy solids. This is just like the molecular structure of a sterol. They are not as vital as triglycerides and phospholipids, but they are still very, very important to the body. So this connection might resonate with some of you, but if you think about people who have high cholesterol, what's generally a symptom or a cause of high cholesterol? Does anybody have an idea what usually causes high cholesterol? High blood pressure, too much meat. Glucose. Okay, here's a hint. If you have high cholesterol, so this isn't true for everybody, and I don't want to offend anybody because I know a lot of people who have high cholesterol and it's not really their fault, but chances are you eat a lot of fast food if you have high cholesterol. Or if you eat a lot of fast food, chances are you have high cholesterol. Any ideas? Okay, so I like the ideas of oil, consumption of too much fat, and too much meat. So meat like white chicken breast generally won't cause high cholesterol, but meat like hot dogs or hamburgers can cause high cholesterol, and that is because they have a lot of fat and they have a lot of oil. So if you eat a lot of fat and you eat a lot of oil, if you have like a high fat oil diet, you are at risk for high cholesterol. That is because if you think of the lipids that are coming into your body, those from oil and those from fat, there's a lot of sterols in them. That's why you will have a lot of cholesterol in your body and thus high cholesterol. Yeah, saturated and unsaturated fats. We're about to get into that, I think. But first, what types of foods do you think would fall within the lipid category? We kind of already talked about this, but give me some ideas. Lipids aren't all bad, so do keep that in mind. They're very important. Anybody have any ideas for lipids? Butter, oil, processed foods, cheese. Yeah, all of these are totally valid. And on the next slide, you will see that actually some things that you probably wouldn't think are high in lipids are. So here you have salmon, nuts, avocados, even broccoli and spinach. I think those are sunflower seeds. Obviously, eggs, milk, cheese. Yeah, these are all high lipid foods. Now, the reason I say not all lipids are bad is because we look at the oil and the fat that you find in a lot of fast food places. And obviously, I'm sure all of you guys know that that's not the best for your health. But if you think about avocados and salmon, those are really good health foods. And the reason for that is because the lipids that you find in avocado and salmon are, if I can go back a slide, are generally composed of triglycerides or phospholipids, which are important for your body. Whereas those in fast foods are generally sterols, which can contribute to health diseases like high cholesterol. Okay, so yeah, one of you mentioned that there is a difference between saturated and unsaturated fats, and you were very right. So what is the difference? What is the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats? So saturated fats, oh, wait a minute. I have a feeling I put this in the wrong order. Okay, so imagine that the labels were flipped. Saturated fats are actually the image at the bottom where you have carbon double bonds. So if you look at the image up top, all of the carbons are only bonded together once. If you look at the image at the bottom, carbons have two bonds between them. So oh wait, no, I got these in the right order. What am I saying? So the idea behind saturated and unsaturated fats is how much hydrogen there is. So saturated fats have a high amount of hydrogen and unsaturated fats have less hydrogen. So if you were to count all of the hydrogen atoms in each structure, you would find that there are more in the top and fewer in the bottom. This is because the double bonds between the carbon in the bottom cause there to be less room for hydrogen. If we talk about bonding later on, it'll make a lot more sense. However, you can just see from the diagram, it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, mentioned the state at room temperature. Saturated are solid at room temp, unsaturated are liquid. Yes. So saturated fats, you can think of coconut oil is actually a really, really good example. So at room temperature, coconut oil is generally solid. Another example, well, butter tends to melt. Yeah, coconut oil is probably the best example. So at room temperature, coconut oil is solid, whereas think of like olive oil, it's liquid, right? So yeah, vegetable oil. So olive oil, vegetable oil, a lot of the oils you would use for cooking are unsaturated, whereas a lot of the oils that you would use for um, a lot of the oils, well, yeah, I guess you use coconut oil for cooking as well. But oils like coconut oil, some types of butter are solid at room temperature and therefore saturated. Okay, so nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are incredibly important to your body. Can anybody tell me how? Give it a few seconds. Any ideas, honestly? DNA and RNA. Okay, yeah, so that's on the nose. That's exactly it. Nucleic acids make up your DNA and your RNA. So, mm-hmm. So if we're talking about the monomers and the polymers for nucleic acids, the monomers would be nucleotides, and polymers, for example, are DNA and RNA. So if we go into this diagram, it points out some really important nucleotides. So nucleotides are the monomers. Remember that because that's important for the homework. So some important nucleotides, these are all the nucleotides that you would find in DNA or RNA. So you have adenine, guanine, uracil, thymine, and cytosine. And these 5 nucleotides can be divided into 2 categories. We have purines, which are 2 carbon rings, and pyrimidines, which are 1 carbon ring. The way I kind of remember the grouping is that purines have the, purines in the names. Okay, this is like really detailed, but purines in the names, there's no Y. Pyrimidines in the names, thymine and cytosine have a Y. Uracil is kind of a one-off thing. It's actually only found in RNA. So once we go into like transcription of genes and translation, it'll be a lot easier to remember that uracil is a pyrimidine. But yeah, you can definitely see in the diagrams that purines have 2 carbon rings versus 1 carbon ring in pyrimidines. And this is just kind of part of their structure. It's not really important that there's a difference between the two, but you'll definitely see why it's relevant when we go into the structures of DNA and such. So yeah, polymers. The polymers of nucleic acids would be DNA and RNA, and these occur when you join together a whole bunch of nucleotides, as I'm sure a lot of you who took biology would know. So for DNA, you can see that it is a double helix shape. You've definitely heard that before. And DNA is actually an abbreviation for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it composes our genetic code. It's located within the nucleus of a cell, and it varies from person to person. In RNA, it's considered ribonucleic acid, and it contains copies of our genetic code that are used to carry out cell processes. So when we discuss the cell, we'll definitely talk a lot more about RNA. And you can see in the images that DNA is composed of adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, while RNA is composed of adenine, guanine, cytosine, and uracil instead of thymine. Okay? So what types of foods do you think fall within the nucleic acid category? This is kind of like a tricky question, and I don't expect anybody to really get any exact foods, but it's got like a pretty interesting explanation. So go ahead and comment if you have any ideas. Veggies, fruit, bananas, meat, spinach. Yeah, okay, I like where this is going. But yeah, you're entirely right. So the idea behind nucleic acids is the idea of unprocessed foods. So by eating whole foods, fruits, vegetables, meat that hasn't been highly processed. So going back to the idea of like white chicken breast, um, these foods so very high in nucleic acids, and that's mostly just because they haven't been edited or processed in any way. Let's continue. Proteins. Now, proteins are arguably really important in that they help carry out so many cell processes, and they're just really important for your body. So let's break it down. Proteins, the monomer would be amino acids, and the polymer you can think of as polypeptide chains. So actually, let's just keep going, I think. Actually, no, you can see it in this image. So if you look at the amino acid, the image under that title, you have a carbon at the middle attached to various groups, one of them being an R group. So the R group it basically is a variable. So I'm pretty sure all of you have done some form of algebra, and then you guys know what a variable is. So R is like a variable, but in the drawing of an amino acid. It represents any functional group. So we'll learn about functional groups a little bit later, but they're very important to chemistry and specifically to do with proteins. Every time you change the functional group in an amino acid, it forms a different amino acid. And that different amino acid, yes. Okay, I will get this name right. Bactarwar. Okay, I probably got that wrong, and I'm really sorry. But they said that R group changes which determines the type of protein it is. So yeah, every time you change the R group, you change the amino acid. And when you change the amino acid, you change the protein. And if you look at the image under polypeptide chains, you can see that there are 3 amino acids. You have your first C, you have your first C attached to an R group, you can see it there, and then the other groups. Then you have another C attached to an R group plus the other groups, and then another C attached to an R group plus the other groups. Okay, so proteins are a little bit different in their structure. You don't just keep attaching them and continue. Proteins are actually kind of folded upon each other. So you have the primary structure, which is composed of multiple amino acids joined into polypeptide chains. Then in secondary structure, that polypeptide chain will either be folded into a pleated sheet, which is, pleated sheet, or it'll be coiled into an alpha helix. Okay, so it's written differently on your homework. I want to make that very clear. If you guys haven't seen the symbol that looks like this is beta and this is alpha. So on your homework, I wrote beta hyphen pleated sheet, and then I wrote alpha hyphen helix. So that's just what it's going to look like on your homework. Just remember it's the same thing. Okay. So the secondary structure is either a pleated sheet or an alpha helix, and the sequence of amino acids, as you see in the polypeptide chain and primary structure, is joined by hydrogen bonds. Then we go to the tertiary structure. So in this, you have pleated sheets and alpha helix. They're all kind of combined and coiled and joined. And what happens is you have certain attractions between alpha helices and pleated sheets. You have sulfuric groups and bonds attached to the protein, and it kind of just helps coil and keep everything together. Then you have the quaternary structure, and this is where you have more than one amino acid chain. So if that makes sense, you're going to have like a whole bunch of these chains. They're going to go individually into secondary structure and individually into tertiary structure. And then finally, you're going to group a whole bunch of them together into the quaternary structure. And that's kind of basically your full protein. Okay. I don't think there's anything in the chat, but I'm just going to check it right now really quick. Nope. Okay. We're all good. Okay. Going on. This is probably going to be one of the easier ones like carbohydrates, but what types of foods do you think fall within the protein category? Meats, yeah, definitely. Chicken, egg, almonds. Yeah, so all of these foods are really high in proteins. Lentils, yes. And you can see here various things. Yeah, we've got lentils, we have meat, even oils. This is kind of surprising because it's a citrus, but I'm pretty sure that's a grapefruit. Avocados, spinach, and I'm sure there's almonds somewhere here. Yeah, almonds. So yeah, all of these foods are really high in protein. And the reason that it's important to have a lot of proteins in your body is because proteins exist in cell membranes, they exist for transportation, and they give you a whole bunch of energy as well. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation and the lecture. Does anybody have any questions? Yep, beans. Does anybody have any questions? This can be generic questions. It could be questions specific to the presentation. If you want me to go back a few slides, I can definitely do that. Give it a few seconds, just in case you have to type something. Oh, okay, got it. Are we gonna have any tests? So for this week, and then I can tell you for next week, probably not. I'm thinking from the way that the curriculum is organized, I'll probably give you like a quiz in the middle, or like maybe two quizzes split out evenly. But they're gonna be really easy. And honestly, it's just kind of your homework is what tests your knowledge. So as long as you complete that, it's basically like completing a quiz. So I think if we're doing good on the homework, there won't be any need to have a quiz. But yeah, what are the different bonds present? Do you mind explaining that a little bit? I don't really understand what you're asking. Is the recording available? I am pretty sure that the recording will be posted onto the Myri-Ed website, but I can ask and then get back to you. I'll just post it on the Google Classroom. I might even be able to post the link to the recording, but there is a recording, so. Oh, yeah, okay, great. It'll be on the Google Classroom. Bakhtawar, do you want to explain your question? What are the different bonds present? I'm not really sure what you're talking about. Like, are you talking about carbs, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids? Which ones? Or all of them? Between the carbon and the hydrogen. Oh, okay. So if we go all the way back to, this one works. Okay, so you've heard of like ionic and covalent bonds if you've taken chemistry and possibly even in um, biology at the very beginning. And we'll definitely talk more about it later. I'll probably create a few slides on that next week. But you have covalent bonds are generally, yeah, most bonds in your body in biology will be covalent bonds. That's because not often do you break apart a lot of proteins and lipids. With carbohydrates, there's a lot of energy that goes into it. So that's why covalent bonds can be broken. But here between the carbon and the hydrogen, it would be covalent bonds. Yeah. uh, okay. If you want to look at DNA, there are hydrogen bonds. So if you can see between the different colors, there are hydrogen bonds between the nucleotides and covalent bonds on the backbone, but we'll get into that more with the structure of DNA. But as for the rest of that, we will talk more about like bonds and specifics when we get to that point in the curriculum. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, then I think that's all. The slideshow, the recording, and the homework assignment will all be on Google Classroom, so you can feel free to go on there. My email is also on Google Classroom, as well as the ability to post class comments. So if you have any questions, just feel free to contact me at any time. Then I think that's all for today. It was really nice to meet all of you, and thanks for being really engaging. Oh, and add Jeffrey on Snap. Okay. I will see you all next week. Bye.